and stuffed it, just as it was, down his throat. Thus he blocked up his windpipe and choked the breath from his body. That was truly to insult death. Karate friends, welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Marc Graves, and today I want to talk about the ancient Roman poop stick that was used instead of toilet paper, and perhaps more importantly, how it could be used as a weapon. So as I mentioned, the Romans did not use toilet paper like we do. Instead, they had an item called a Territorium, which was basically just a stick with a sponge on one end, and you would use that to wipe your bottom. And it was generally kept in a bucket of either water, maybe a little vinegar, and it was used communally. So extremely disgusting and disease spreading, and not something you want to bring up in polite conversation generally. But the Roman poet Martial, who's a bit of a comedian, did bring it up and referred to it as damnatus, as just this condemned, untouchable, unspeakable item, and mentioned it in a really fun little poem that goes, "But it's a fine dinner, very fine, I confess, but tomorrow it will be nothing. Or rather today, or rather a moment from now, it will be nothing. A matter for a luckless sponge, or a doomed mop stick, or some dog or other, or a crock by the roadside to take care of. That is what mullet and hairs and sows utter come to. That and a pasty complexion and feet that play torturer. No Alban revel would be worth it to me, no Capitoline or pontifical banquets. Should a god himself debit me with nectar, it would turn to vinegar and the treacherous flat content of a Vatican jar. Feastmaster, look for other guests to be captivated by the proud despotism of your table. As for me, let a friend invite me to potluck morsels. I like a dinner I can return." So you can see Martial is complaining about some fancy pants putting on this elaborate dinner party with all these strange dishes like sow's udder and such, and he's complaining that it's all going to end up in the same place. It's not worth all this effort, and saying he'd much rather go to a simple potluck where the host isn't being all stuck up and where Martial has a chance of reciprocating. So very funny little poem, and the word poopstick in there is accompanied by the word damnatus, as I said, and this translation happened to go with luckless, but godforsaken, or anything along those lines would work as well. We also have an amazing story from Suetonius's Life of the Emperor Augustus, how apparently Augustus at one point tried his hand at writing poetry, and he was writing this poem about the Greek hero Ajax, who tragically ultimately ended up killing himself after being tricked and humiliated by Athena. So Augustus is writing this poetry, but he gets fed up with it, he thinks it's trash, so he has it destroyed, and then some of his friends ask him, "Hey, how's that poetry that you were writing going?" And he allegedly responds that his Ajax had fallen upon his sponge. So a bit of a self-burn there, I guess, and also kind of dark humor, implying that his Ajax that he was writing was just such garbage that he didn't even heroically fall on his own sword. He instead pathetically died or killed himself via poopstick. And finally, we come to the best, but also potentially worst part of this video, depending on what your take is, courtesy of Seneca the Elder. So he is a famous Roman writer on philosophy, especially Stoicism, and he at one point is referencing the story of Cato. So Cato is another famous Roman, and particularly famous Roman Stoic. He lived at the end of the Roman Republic, and at the time when Julius Caesar was taking over and becoming a permanent dictator, and Cato was extremely distraught over this, and he did not want to live in Julius Caesar's world. So what he did was he had this big dinner party, invited all his friends as a sort of final farewell, although he didn't tell them that. After everyone had gone to bed, he quietly went into his room and stabbed himself right in the guts, but somebody heard, they came running in, and they called a doctor, they stitched him up, and they said, "Bad Cato, don't do that, we love you." And he said, yeah, sure, whatever. And then as soon as everyone had gone, with his own bare hands, he picked out the stitches that the doctor had just made and then ripped out his own guts again with his hands. So an extremely intense story that many Stoics really loved and looked up to. In some cases it became a bit of a death cult, but we won't go into that today. I have talked about this a little in other videos, how in the ancient world, suicide was not always automatically seen as a negative. There were some cases where it was morally neutral, and in some cases where it was morally admirable. Even in this case, people looked up to Cato and sometimes emulated him. So Seneca is just referencing Cato because he's this great hero and admiring his bravery and his determination to live a virtuous life and not be boxed in or forced to make what he would consider unvirtuous decisions. But the point that he's getting at is that you don't have to be a Cato to make this kind of decision. Anyone, just a normal human, can also be this brave and this stoic. And he recounts an example of this, a story of just an ordinary gladiator. And that goes: for example, there was lately in a training school for wild beast gladiators a German who was making ready for the morning exhibition. He withdrew in order to relieve himself, the only thing which he was allowed to do in secret and without the presence of a guard. While so engaged, he seized the stick of wood, tipped with a sponge, which was devoted to the vilest uses, and stuffed it, just as it was, down his throat. Thus he blocked up his windpipe and choked the breath from his body. That was truly to insult death. Yes, indeed, it was not a very elegant or becoming way to die, but what is more foolish than to be overnice about dying? What a brave fellow. He surely deserved to be allowed to choose his fate. How bravely he would have wielded a sword, with what courage he would have hurled himself into the depths of the sea or down a precipice. Cut off from resources on every hand, he yet found a way to furnish himself with death and with a weapon for death. Hence, you can understand that nothing but the will need postpone death. So again, sounding pretty death culty, and I'm definitely discouraging everyone out there, please don't go kill yourself with toilet paper because of this story. Like, obviously, no. But what Seneca is trying to get at is that this man was probably captured as a slave in war with the Romans at some point, and he's being forced to be a gladiator, and he finds this humiliating or amoral or depressing, and he feels like he has no moral or noble options other than this. And so he bravely takes the initiative and gets it done, and Seneca's admiring him for this. And I don't really know what I'm supposed to feel or think about this story. I can't help but feel some admiration for him. I mean, he clearly was so determined to do what he thought was right, so you have to admire that in some degree. I really don't know, so I'm interested to hear what your reactions and feelings to this story are. Thank you so much for checking out this video on Roman poop sticks and their deadly applications. Special thank you to subscribers and to Patreon members. I hope to see all of you again next week. Karate.